This is a presentation of the paper Multiple Realization and Evolutionary Dynamics, a fitness-based account. Multiple realization occurs when a natural kind is variably realized at more basic levels, and the common physical structure of the realizers is not essential for supporting nomological statements. A case in point is that of sex pheromones that attract individuals of the opposite sex, triggering the performance of behaviors related to sexual reproduction. In terms of chemistry, pheromones lack a common structure and consequently are not projectable. Yet, from the perspective of biology, pheromones constitute a natural kind and elicit a systematic pattern of behaviors. Such biological regularities would pass undetected if regarded at the level of chemical implementation. Multiple realization is a subject of considerable research, engaging metaphysical, empirical, and theoretical perspectives. The theoretical literature focuses on the mechanism behind multiple realization and its scope. The present paper is a contribution to those two streams of theoretical literature. According to Fodor, multiply realized laws satisfy the three conditions shown on this slide and depicted in the figure on the right. What is important in the concept of multiple realization is that there is no operator of identity or equivalence between the types or classes of the special sciences and the types of the more basic sciences. If there were, there would be reduction. The question addressed by this literature is, how could multiple realized kinds produce nomological convergence at the macroscopic level? Note that convergence is easy to explain if there is uniformity at the microscopic level, but microscopic uniformity is precisely what is unavailable in the presence of multiple realization. Therefore, we need a mechanism explaining how macroscopic order results from microscopic variability. Some philosophers suggest that selective mechanisms may be able to account for the uniformity of special laws without compromising the requirement of non-uniformity at the level of the realizers. According to this account, selection works as a filter within a certain population of traits, taking as input their variation and retaining those traits that are fitter than their competitors in terms of producing an adaptive result. Note that selection focuses on outcomes, therefore, any structure that performs a task is selected for. Provided that there are different structures that perform a given task, they are retained and multiple realization follows. In the example of the pheromones, any arrangement of chemicals that males detect as a reliable signal of females' sexual maturity will be selected for. The main reason is that selection is sensitive not to pheromones' chemical structure, but to their performance as mating coordinate. The mechanism put forth by the function cum selection account relies on two features of natural selection, namely variation and differential replication. The main idea is that whereas variation produces a continuous supply of potential realizers, differential replication retains those that successfully perform an advantageous function. In this way, multiple realizers may come to coexist despite lacking a common physical property. The function cum selective account measures the fitness of each trait in terms of whether or not it is able to produce a given result. In this way, any two realizers that perform a function may coexist. We argue that this binary measure of fitness misses an important aspect of the dynamics of multiple realization that bears on the conditions for its existence. Consider again the case of sex pheromones. Their molecular structure has been found to vary according to how the message is sent, for instance, wind versus water, and received, for instance, on the nose or the antenna of the recipient. We can expect certain molecular structures to be more adequate for certain characteristics of the means of transportation and the detection system of the receptors. In other words, some pheromones may be produced and detected more easily, affecting the reproduction rates of female and male senders and receptors. This process will lead eventually to the elimination of relatively unfit pheromones, even when the latter coordinate mating activities successfully. Therefore, according to the fitness-based account, coexistent pheromones subject to common evolutionary pressures must be equally fit. In this paper, we argue that the function cum selective approach needs revision. We believe that its measure of fitness is too permissive and therefore unable to explain important aspects of the phenomena. The main problem is that it focuses only on whether a realizer performs an adaptive function, disregarding the specific fitness of the realizers. We claim that for this reason the function cum selective account is unable to explain why realizers that are apt to perform a task did not persist. Another weakness is that it fails to predict the proportion in which the different realizers will be present. Based on off-the-shelf results of games with evolutionary stable mixed strategies, our model predicts that strictly dominated realizers will be driven out of the population. It also predicts the proportion of competing realizers, or phenotypes, coexisting in an evolutionary stable equilibrium as a function of the parameters of the game. With this requirement, the explanatory power of the functional cum-selective account becomes more restricted than previously thought. Another important upshot of the fitness-based analysis is that multiply realized behaviors at the population level need not be a sign of multiple realization at the individual level. The current literature does not pin down the conditions under which different levels of organization may become multiply realized. To investigate this matter, we model the dynamics of multiple realizers by means of an evolutionary game theoretic setup in which the stable equilibrium entails the coexistence of more than one realizer. Consider, for instance, the hawk and dove game that has such a structure as depicted on the left and right sides of this figure. On the left, there is reduction in physical types at the individual level. Some individuals always play hawk, whereas others always play dove. At the population level, we have a polymorphic structure. In contrast, on the right, we have a polymorphic population consisting of polymorphic individuals who play hawk and dove with probabilities delta and 1 minus delta, respectively. In this configuration, the evolutionary stable outcome is reached by only one type with variable behaviors. On the left, hawks and doves have the same expected fitness, and on the right, every individual is indifferent between these two behaviors as they entail the same expected fitness. Although the two populations are physically different, in equilibrium they have the same proportion of hawkish and dovish behaviors, which are on average equally fit. According to some scholars, across and within species multiple realization are different phenomena. Let me say here that the original discussion focused on multiple realization across species. The canonical example is that of pain. Different organisms react in the same way, namely avoidance, when they are injured. However, the neurobiological basis of behavior in, let's say, mollusks and mammals is different. In other words, there is multiple realization because each species implements the reaction on a different neurobiological structure, even though there is a special law across species about pain at the behavioral level. Progressively, multiple realization was generalized to include cases even within a single species. And it is this generalization that made things a bit muddy, because cases of cross-species multiple realization seem less problematic than cases that are within species. The point is that the functional cum-selective account cannot explain this difference. In contrast, the fitness-based account provides a mechanism based on the notion of competitive niche that explains why they differ. To present this result, we need to go back to Fodor's model. In that model that you can see here on the right, each instantiation of a P1J predicate entails only one instantiation of a P2J predicate. Fodor's model presupposes a particular relationship between the realizers in the antecedent and the consequent. However, there are other types of relationships between the predicates that could be taken into account to fully understand the dynamics of multiple realization. The four possible combinations are displayed on the right. We argue that it is necessary to distinguish whether realizers are subject to common selection pressures or not. We indicate these kinds of structure by dotted rectangles. So when you see them, that means that the two realizers are competing within the same niche. We define intra-niche multiple realization as a case in which the realizers are subject to common selective pressures, and inter-niche as a case in which they are not. We use the concept of niche to refer to barriers of different kinds, biological, cultural, ecological, etc., that keep realizers isolated from competition against each other. Across a species, or species-wide multiple realization, involves inter-niche dynamics, whereas within a species, or species-specific multiple realization, is compatible with both types. Here, we present some examples. Pain, for instance, is an instance of across a species and inter-niche multiple realization. Category traits are often instances of within species and inter-niche multiple realization, and this is when cultural and geographical barriers isolate realizers in different niches so that they are prevented from competing. Sex pheromones are an example of within species and intra-niche multiple realization. We claim that when realizers are in different niches, they are not subject to common selective pressures, and because they do not compete against each other, they do not need to satisfy the stringent equal fitness condition. For this reason, the model predicts that in those cases, multiple realization will be more frequent. Putnam's example of pain would fall into precisely this category. According to our model, there is nothing mysterious about the fact that there is multiple realization in this case, precisely because the realizers do not belong to the same niche and do not compete with each other. Mimicry is another example. Behind it is the intention to deceive a possible predator, exploiting signals to which this predator has been selected to be sensitive. While this phenomenon is general and holds across a species, its realization is species-specific. According to our account, the diversity of defensive camouflage is not a mystery. Because these realizers do not belong to the same niche, they are not subject to common evolutionary pressures and may thrive unfettered. The same happens to the pheromones of diverse molecular compositions. However, when selection takes place within a single niche, it introduces strong pressures against multiple realization. Because the equal fitness constraint is hard to meet, the model predicts that within species, multiple realization will be unlikely. In this way, our model sheds light on the scope and the level of multiple realization. The scope concerns the range of situations in which we can expect multiple realization to hold, and the level relates to the organizational layer at which multiple realization occurs. We would like to point out that our model is agnostic about the explanatory power of evolutionary theories of multiple realization. It mainly suggests a refinement to the measurement of fitness and a model of its dynamics leading to novel predictions. It also highlights the potential of strategic approaches to multiple realization. In particular, it shows that there is an additional reason for the evolution of diversity. Let me show this by means of an example. Animals live in ecosystems populated by other species. Physically non-uniform pheromones provide the necessary specificity for animals to avoid sending information to the wrong species. Our model shows how the evolution of these types of coordination may underline the phenomenon of multiple realization. The function cum selective account endows the multiple realization framework with a selective mechanism. Its main idea is that outcome-oriented processes, such as natural selection, retain physically diverse realizers as long as they perform a fitness-enhancing function. We argue here that this account must be qualified and propose shifting the focus from the question of whether a realizer performs a given adaptive function to that of its relative fitness. The contribution of our paper is threefold. First, it qualifies the function cum selective account by adding the condition of equal expected fitness. The idea that an organism needs some way of performing a function falls short of specifying the full set of conditions under which multiple realizers come to persist in the population. The function cum selective account builds on the principle that realizers that perform a function will coexist, whereas the fitness-based model contends that outperformed realizers, in the sense of being strictly dominated, will be driven out of the population even when they perform the task at hand. The second contribution of our account is that it distinguishes between multiple realization at different levels of organization. As it turns out, multiple realization at the population level need not entail multiple realization at the individual level. A polymorphic population may consist of either polymorphic or monomorphic individuals, as long as both phenotypes have the same expected fitness. Furthermore, once the payouts are given, our account predicts the particular share of each realizer in the population. This analysis is beyond the scope of the function cum selective account. The last contribution is that it qualifies the scope of multiple realization by introducing the notion of competitive niches. The main idea is that the equal fitness condition is binding only when the realizers are subject to common selection pressures. Across and within species, multiple realization differ in this respect. Whereas the former involves only disjoint niches, thereby falling in the category of inter-niche multiple realization, the latter usually concerns cases of intra-niche multiple realization. As a consequence, across-species multiple realization is subject to less stringent conditions than its within-species counterpart. Thank you for your attention.